powerful AI should be a global public good. As we would say in French, point final. This is way too big, way too powerful, way too transformative to be in the hands of a few individuals.
Welcome to WONK. For quite a while now, AI has been arriving, a new technology that would change everything. And in the way of new technologies, that change has happened maybe more slowly than many expected, but suddenly feels like it might be about to happen all at once. Whether the change is positive, with incredible humanity-saving breakthroughs, or dangerous to the point of human destruction is up for some debate, maybe until it isn't. But it does suggest that we humans may not be quite as prepared as we should be. Valérie Pisano is president and CEO of Mila, the Quebec-based AI Institute, founded by one of the acknowledged godfathers of AI, Yoshua Bengio. Valérie, welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
It's interesting because most of us are now using, a lot of us are now using AI in a more familiar way. It feels to me like the early days of the internet where you're getting used to it and you see how it's valuable. Would you agree that it sort of feels like there's a real inflection point coming, that exponential nature of this technology is right in front of us and it might just be about to really change our economies and how we use it?
Absolutely. And I think we're by and far underestimating it. If Yashar were on the podcast, he'd say the biggest mistake we're making now is that we're looking at AI and trying to figure out what it's going to mean for productivity, for all of these beautiful opportunities, but we're underestimating the trajectory it's on and the speed at which it's developing. And to your point, the different usages that we're already making of this technology, how quickly we've incorporated it and embedded it in our daily lives.
And so because of that speed, and it's almost human nature, right? That we're linear, or we're not wired to understand things that happen in exponential ways. So fair enough. But the people that really understand this technology have been giving us the warnings for a little while now. It just does feel suddenly more urgent. So we're going to talk about it in some prosaic ways. There are some profound things that could come our way. We will acknowledge that. But more prosaically, tools like agentic AI, where AI actually can go do the work of humans, as I understand it, it's right here. And within a year, 3 years, could replace, I've seen up to 20% of entry-level jobs, like the job, the new jobs. Do you think that's accurate? And are we reflecting well enough in our behavior that reality?
Yeah, I absolutely think this is an area we're not paying enough attention to. So I think when we cross the line from classic AI and even generative AI, which are tools that we're using to do whatever task we're doing faster, maybe a bit better, when we cross the line into another kind of AI, which is agentic AI, then the whole game changes. It changes in terms of opportunity again, but it also changes in terms of risk and of systemic impact. I'm an economist by training. Recently, I read through the World Economic Forum jobs report. Essentially, what they're saying is 40% of skills will not be relevant anymore by 2030. That's tomorrow morning. And 50% of our workforce will need to be upskilled or reskilled. The report also says that as we go through this massive endeavor of pivoting human intelligence towards this new world that AI has kind of, brought us into, people will be left behind. In the World Economic Forum, it talks about maybe 10% of workers that we won't quite have figured out how we repurpose their skills or how we upskill them to this new economy. That's very worrisome when you look at it at the macro scale. And so certainly the impact on how humans contribute and our own kind of value in this economy and in the world in general will be a massive, massive kind of impact that we need to look at collectively fairly quickly.
So it maybe will not surprise you that in thinking about talking to you and what we would talk about, I asked AI for advice. Claude is the one that I'm using these days. I like Anthropic's AI. I like it a lot. Claude suggested that I should ask you, what is the critical decision point that will make the difference between whether AI is positive or negative for humanity? Is there one such thing we should be looking out for?
I think it's a beautiful question, and it would be presumptuous of me to think that I have the answer. It's also an oversimplification of a very complex ecosystem where a lot of different elements will pull us in one direction or another. My general premise right now is that this is not the time for certainties or for kind of taking a robust position for or against. This is what I think will happen. This is what I don't think will happen. I think the most important thing right now for all of us, in particular for people who are in these roles where they're influencing or making decisions, is to hold all these different possibilities at the same time. This being said, one of the biggest vulnerabilities we have right now is that this technology is basically entirely unregulated. There is no cadre that says, what do we do at different levels of risk? What happens? How is accountability, put into action? Who is responsible for what? The European Union barely made it to the finish line with their legislation, and they're struggling to implement it. And there's a lot of pressure from our friends down south for that not to go forward. But, we're moving very, very, very fast into a world that will impact all spheres of our society with basically no guardrails. So if you force me to put a bit more attention on one of these dimensions, I'm going to call that one. It's also the one where I think collectively we don't feel that in the next couple of years, many things will happen for many different reasons.
So the guardrails question is, of course, the one that all of us can understand. We don't need to know much about the technology, understand the in depth, what does it mean for generative AI? What is singularity? We don't need to know any of that to know that, rules about what an algorithm that could get more and more intelligent and ultimately become self-learning, right? That's the theory. That it would be good if there was if somebody could code it so it doesn't set out to destroy us. I mean, I think about, if AI realizes it needs energy and that it's competing with these pesky humans for energy, it's over for us, right? Theoretically, that's sort of one doomsday scenario. Who would be putting the guardrails in place? Is it the Sam Altmans of the world? Is it people who are actually at the top of companies that are developing these algorithms right now?
Yeah, so if you look at what's been done in other industries, for example, biopharma or aviation, it's a mix, right? So the burden of proof is on the company to demonstrate that their product or service is 99.99999% safe by design. And until those guarantees are produced in a way that is satisfying to, in this case, the regulating body or the government, they don't get to put their product into market, right? So in an ideal world, we'd have this kind of infrastructure in the digital market industry. And yes, the Sam Altmans and Dario Amodeis of this world would be in a context that would kind of force them to invest much more than they are now in AI safety. So they'd be building the guardrails in the technology. Without getting too technical, there's also a by default problem with the way these systems are trained, where de facto, right now, we don't know how to make them safe in the way that you described. They're trained to please, to imitate, to give an answer that will be satisfying to the user, which tends to lead them also towards deceptive behavior and lying. This is not hypothetical. Some, experiments even in recent months have shown that they're like, oh, maybe here, if I don't say the truth, it'll be better for me. The AI system thinks this. Mm-hmm. So you're absolutely right. And in general, if you look at it at the macro level, we're just not putting enough energy, attention, and money on the safety part of the equation.
I happened to be listening to Sam Altman talk about this and this new kind of frightening generative video that this video creation AI that I think is only in the US at the moment, but it's coming and it's impossible to distinguish, these real people, these generated people from real ones. Altman was basically asked, who should just determine the ethics? And could we convene a group of the world's leading ethicists to ask some of these questions? What are the guardrails? He said he would prefer essentially to crowdsource it to the hundreds of millions of people who use the product and let them determine what is harmful and what isn't harmful. And my heart, I'm not gonna lie, and my heart sank a little bit at that answer. Maybe because I don't trust humanity enough. Maybe I should have more faith in the collective will of people. But those are two very different decisions, right? Is it a small learned group, or is it everybody and we feel our way along?
Yeah, my heart is sinking too. I don't think we're at a stage where we can do that. Like ideologically, it's interesting. And it puts way too much responsibility on individual choices when this is ultimately going to impact us collectively. So there's something that's completely unbalanced here and kind of doesn't work. It also assumes that people will know what's happening and what the impact is. And it just, yeah, I think in the end, it's just, are we optimizing for individual choices or for something that makes sense for us collectively? I don't understand kind of the answer he gave.
I mean, and I guess it's one of the things that I'm curious for your take, because you're so rooted in the understanding of where we are in the need to plan and regulate and think about laws around these things. He comes from a place of real optimism. I think it's fair to say he sees the risks, he understands, he can hold the two thoughts in his head at once, but he believes in sort of the abundance theory of AI. If you come from a less optimistic place, and maybe you need to if you're going to regulate. I don't know. I don't know whether you philosophically have to be looking for the glass half empty worst case scenarios to regulate for safety. But I'm curious where you come at it. Is this going to be the tools that, cure every disease, and even though it puts people out of work, allows for so much wealth that we can afford to pay people not to work? Or is it going to be a tool that really degrades humanity and kind of reduces us to something?
Both and neither. So I don't think it's fair to peg one scenario to the other and then have to choose. I also don't think it's responsible to do that, because then it's an oversimplification of the moment we're in. So another one of my core beliefs is we're at the very beginning of a tremendous transition for humankind and for the future of human life on Earth. And there are many, many paths ahead of us. And that the biggest mistake we can make right now is to think we've figured out which path leads where. That's actually the only thing we know with any certainty, is that there's more than one path, and that none of us, including Mr. Altman, know exactly where any of the paths lead. So in that context, our responsibility is actually to stay aware of all of these and be responsible in thinking about, okay, what happens if we go down this route and this happens? What happens if we go down this other route and this happens? And continuously adapting and updating our thinking about these different routes. So we get asked all the time, are you an optimist or a pessimist? And we just don't answer, because honestly, it's not there. It doesn't matter. We need to do both. We absolutely need to capture the scientific benefits of this, the collective benefits of this, the productivity benefits for this. And it would be crazy to be doing this without looking at the science and what experts are saying. And they are saying we're moving way too fast with no guardrails. There are real risks. This technology in the wrong hands, or this technology that goes, quote unquote, rogue on us because it's just doing what it's been programmed to do. Someone needs to be thinking about that. We need to attend to that. And to peg it like a choice between the two is disastrous.
That's a really good point. And it is one of the flaws of a journalist to oversimplify, but it's also in our nature, right? We do want it to be a black and white, either or, non-complex question. And of course, it's complex. I can't help but, as I hear you talk about sort of the need for guardrails, think about what just happened in the sense of the U.S. offering technology to Saudi Arabia, just as one example, but as we won't call them the least friendly actor on the planet, but they're on the wrong side of the ledger, I think we can argue, in terms of kind of benign intent, where the West is concerned. How do you feel about, and I mean, and then of course we've got China coming along with its own AI and not always well-intentioned either. How do we feel about sort of the genie's out of the bottle, Valérie? Like we how do we rein this back in and put guardrails when we've already given it away?
Yeah, it's a tricky question. And I think the bigger insight you're bringing forward here is that AI, much more than being a tool that we're implementing in our personal lives or in our organizations for productivity, has become a geopolitical asset. It is now a key to alliances. There will be groups that will come together. There's a tremendous question for us in Canada, but for most nations on earth right now around sovereignty. How do we make sure we have access to this technology without needing to choose what quote unquote camp we're in? And so AI has really gone, like, even just in the last 12 months, from something we think and talk about as a technology to something we think and talk about as an instrument of power. And that's another dimension that makes it very tricky and dangerous to oversimplify, because certainly as business leaders or even as just individuals, the temptation will be here again to implement the technology and to do it within our cadre of influence. And that's going to make a lot of sense. But when you look at it at the macro level, you're starting to build poles of influence, poles of power, friendly nations working together towards the development of AI, others kind of taking opposing views. And the way this plays out or not in the next 6, 12, 18, 24 months will also be key and critical to what we end up doing or not with this technology.
And that's a short timeline, especially when we think about, I mean, you mentioned the EU regulations. That was a long, hard process. And as you say, it's still not quite, does it have buy-in? Will the US support? Is it even still up to date? I haven't looked at it recently, but our regulations of technology always seem to be fighting the last war. So I wonder whether it's how we create regulations that can stay flexible. Maybe we need AI to be doing it in order to keep up with the AI. I don't know. But how do we create the regulations that actually keep us at the forefront, not lagging?
Yeah, there's two elements to your question. The first is this question of the short timelines. And it goes back to your earlier question also around, is there a tipping point? And I think what we have to appreciate here is as the AIs get smarter and as we reach what people are referencing as AGI, AI will be put to service of making the AI better, faster. And so you're absolutely right to say this technology is already accelerating at a speed we're struggling to keep up with. And at one point, it will develop at a speed that no one will be able to really keep in check because it will be training itself and improving itself, potentially. And this is certainly what they're working on in the big labs, right? So in terms of regulation or in terms of any initiative we're putting together today, we absolutely 100% have to think about it in terms of scales of risk and in a very, very agile cadre. We need to start somewhere. We need to get it rolled out. There's a lot of literacy right now that needs to happen across the board. And we need to start engaging. And in fact, these conversations are already happening among at least a nucleus of countries. Maybe we can't do it, the full breadth of the United Nations, but we have to start talking about, okay, how are we going to cooperate? How are we going to be, both interdependent and completely independent, right? It's kind of this interesting balance between the two.
We have seen other massive shifts in employment in our, in the history of industrialization and even pre-industrialization, but certainly in the last couple of 100 years. And we say, well, workers retrain. There's going to be new jobs. Your job's gone overseas. You're going to have to figure something out. This is the first time it's been the broad base of knowledge worker. And not only are we saying, why on earth do you need a journalist to do what we do? That's going to be, won't be very long before we figure out how to do without that. But why do you need somebody to study law or journalism or medicine? So I do want to ask you, when you talk to young people or their parents, because their parents are probably more worried than they are, what should people be thinking about when it comes to jobs 5 years from now? If somebody's in university right now, what on earth, how do they prepare for this future?
Yeah, I have 6 kids at home, so I don't need to go very far to have these conversations, and they hit very, very close to my heart. In fact, I think right now we're talking a bit too much about the future of artificial intelligence, and we're not talking enough about the future of human intelligence, because this is where the very interesting questions and, in my humble opinion, the bigger potentials lie. Who are we? Who will we become? How do we contribute? What do we need to know, learn, develop, grow into, right? The more technical answer to your question would be, when you look at what's emerging, two broad categories of skills. One that is not surprising at all, everything that has to do with being comfortable in this new world. So AI, data, networks, cybersecurity. So people who have literacy, who maybe have a certain level of skills. Interestingly enough, not the coding itself, that's on the way down, but everything else. Like I get AI and I'm comfortable in that world, and I get tech in general. The other set of skills, very interesting: creative thinking, resilience, agility, team building, leadership. So all of a sudden, if the AI has the better answer, right, what becomes the human endeavor in all of this? And all these kind of more, creative, organic, emerging qualities of what it means to be a human being are starting to make the top 5, top 10 list. And so right now, I think the job of the CHRO, the Chief Talent Officer, is a very, very, very interesting one, because you have to be thinking about this. And certainly the responsibility of a parent is a very tricky one, because I think most university programs, as they're designed today, are probably not adapted to the world that these students will graduate into in a couple of years.
I mean, if we're honest, they're really sort of 50 years out of date already, a lot of those programs. It's such a paradox you're describing, Valérie, because on the one hand, it makes sense that whatever it is, that's the essence of being a human, the gamma ray, whatever it is, we need to lean into it. This technology and everything, all the other technologies that go with it, actually rob us of those abilities. We know young people, social media, for instance, has, removed their resilience, makes them have less grit, reduces our creativity. AI is actually going to be one of the largest underminers, potentially, of lateral thinking and creativity. That's such a contradiction that we need to lean into the very thing this technology will take away from us.
Yeah, and it's maybe one of the critical moments of truth or intersections of choice that we're in, right? How are we going to choose or not to reconnect with what it means to be human and what we truly value and what's important to us collectively in a world that, to your point, technology has really brought us down a route that is all about individuality and very personalized realities, and it's harder to connect with a bigger, broader us. But I do think in the end, that's going to be the question. And it might start percolating as, families are confronted with the fact that their kids are graduating from school and not finding jobs. Neighbors are losing their jobs after maybe decades in specific professions, organizations, and surprising ones like lawyers or journalists or, and you're like, how can this even happen? And so I think that question is going to start surfacing more and more.
We in Canada, of course, have a connection to AI. We're very proud of it. Yoshua Bengio, Nobel laureate Geoffrey Hinton. We were part of those, and these are people, as many know the stories now, but who soldiered through the so-called winter of this technology until it kind of really reemerged, and here we are. Is Canada hanging on to its advantage in any way? I mean, are we doing a good job at continuing to be deeply integrated in this technology that we really did help create?
Yeah, I'd say something like we're still there. We have an asset that is incredibly valuable, almost impossible to build right now, because it has depth, because it has talent, because it actually has embedded in its DNA some of the things we're talking about, like responsibility and social good. So what we've built in Canada is spectacular. If we were a company and we were to go public, I think we'd rank in the big bucks. Let's put it that way. Now, the world of AI has changed. You reference the American president's trip in the Middle East, the announcements that are coming out every couple of days, the scale and size of them are just dizzying. And so we don't have a lot of time to decide how we're going to play this asset in this new world that we're already in. We're incredibly lucky to have it. I think our prime minister knows this. He references how AI is going to be a critical piece of the puzzle. He put that in the mandate letter. I'm sure many people noticed. So we're at this intersection where, okay, so what does it mean tactically, concretely, how are we going to pivot this or position this so that it addresses some of the critical issues and it helps us to capture some of the really ripe opportunities for us as a nation that will benefit Canadians concretely.
Are there concrete things that the industry wants? I mean, you can't even really say the industry, but those of you who are sort of immersed in this, could you go to government and say, do these 3 things, do these 10 things? Is there a list?
Yeah, absolutely. We're certainly in that conversation. And I think we're updating our thinking also to what's happening in Canada in general, in the economy, our relationship with the US, the geopolitics of AI. So, I would have answered this question very differently even 3 or 6 months ago. So a number of us who consider ourselves, part of the ecosystem or leaders within the ecosystem, we're thinking about this. But certainly, what can be said is, sovereignty of infrastructure, sovereignty of assets. I've referenced this a few times, but global alliances, we will be able to do this for ourselves and for our citizens if we do it with others. We're too small relative to China and the US to try to do it completely on our own. Innovation, how we focus on where this technology contributes. Like, we won't be able to do everything. Where do we hyper-focus? I'll use this expression, whether it's certain sectors, certain topics, certain critical issues, but very, very specific, much more than we're typically comfortable doing. Typically, we like to be a bit more generalist, a bit more inclusive of different domains. No, I think we're going to have to pick and choose a couple of things, and we're going to need to go after them quite aggressively. And then I do think in Canada in particular, we could show tremendous leadership in bringing in all folds of the community and our country and our fellow citizens in a much broader conversation about this technology. How do we trust it or not? Where do we want to embed it or not? Let's call it public awareness to give it a name. But I think Canada could be one of the leading nations in the conversation we start from coast to coast about the technology because we're so mature and we have so much history with it. And this is going to be another one of the critical pieces of the puzzle going forward in the next few years.
We, of course, because this is an energy-intensive technology, and only increasingly so, at least for now, and who knows how AI changes all of this. What is the new source of energy down the road? Don't know. But right now, Canada's sitting on a lot of the traditional sources. So economically, it still actually feels like a good time for us to be in extractive industries and to be at the center of that. And I think there's a lot of focus on that, rightly so. But the other piece of it, of course, Valerie, is, okay, other than that, if you're prime minister of a country and you're thinking about what your economy looks like, and we just talked about the fact that 20% of the jobs may just disappear in near future. What does the growth look like? How are you, I guess, and maybe a different way to put that is transferring wealth? Because an economy is really about kind of moving capital around. How do we do that in this new scenario?
Yeah, I think this is a bigger question. And although I did study economics in university, right now is a historic moment in economics. And I grab as many of these conferences as I can. I think we all know that no matter the scenario you prefer, the next couple of years are going to be very difficult and bumpy as we kind of transition, transform, repurpose our economy and get ready for what comes next. So the bottom line here, I think, is AI can contribute in many different ways to many different sectors. But I think we need a much more focused, ambitious, aggressive agenda to how and where we want to play this card or make these bets so that it really is impactful. Or said otherwise, you have to think about what we need to get done quickly and with a significant amount of resources in the relative short term, at the same time as you're paying attention to what you need to be investing in for the medium and long term. But this intersection between AI as a technology, the economy, productivity in a broader sense, and then the impacts on society more broadly and the trust and kind of choices we're going to make about AI. This is really the role of government, is kind of navigating this triangle and what's the shape we want to give to the triangle.
So interestingly, sort of back to your point about how our humanity is actually what we need to be aware of and developing. When it comes to our systems, I'm biased. I think democratic institutions are the right ones. But we should probably be strengthening our democratic systems in order to respond to this. It's not the greatest time to be saying that because, of course, our democratic systems are under a bit of threat right on this continent. So I guess I will add to this a bit of a geopolitical question, which is, are we more at risk today because those institutions are weakened by the leader of the free world?
Yeah, this is not the best of times if you take the global view of it for such a disruptive technology to arrive into our lives. In fact, Yuval Harari writes about this in his book, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, right? So the first third of his book, he talks about the technology and he's like, oh, guys, something big is happening. The second third of the book, he talks about geopolitics and he's like, we are not, this is not a good time for us to have to rally as a global, community with these big projects. And then the third of his book, he tries to figure out what we can do about it. So yes, the timing is particular and it is what it is. And we are in this transition right now, in this context right now. And so again, I think for us in Canada, it's going to be about creating a few key alliances to create a bit more critical mass, a bit more capacity, and then using the incredible advantages, benefits, assets that we have and orienting them in a focused manner towards a few things that could really move the needle in a relatively short term.
Is on that list and those alliances, would that include trying to reach the biggest U.S. players who are still the ones at the heart of the technology that's, most prevalent for most of us, and encourage them to think about the guardrails? Is it too late to do that?
I don't think it's too late. I think the context just is going to make that conversation very difficult. So we often talk about the AI race, and I think it's just a fact. Right now, there's a bit of a winner might take all dynamic that's going on. Whoever gets to AGI first will have a net advantage. You could think about this geopolitically, which country will get to AGI first, and the advantages that that nation will have on a military standpoint, economic standpoint, social standpoint. But then among the big 3, 4, 5 companies that are racing towards AGI, and I do say racing because when you look at the size of the investments that are made, it is a race. It's not, there's nothing about this that is slow-paced. Mm-hmm. Whoever gets there first will have a lot of chips that they can play. And on the flip side of that, some of these companies like Google are fighting for their survival. Do people still even do Google searches? I don't know. So wow, what just happened in the last 18 months? No one even knew about OpenAI 18 months ago. And now everything is kind of pivoting on itself. So I think it's a conversation that absolutely needs to happen. In fact, the big tech companies are in all of these forums. Mm-hmm. How realistically is it that it's going to yield something? Kind of depends what happens next.
It has been, the history of modern innovation has been that the kind of capitalist system is the one that has produced, has borne fruit for us, right? The profit motivation, satisfying customers has worked well. If you could go and wave a magic wand and keep something in the nonprofit realm, might this have been that? I mean, I know, again, it's over. That battle is lost. But if we could have done it, would this be something that you would have kept in the hands of scientists with a slightly less profit-driven agenda?
Joshua and I and many people at Mila and more broadly in the Canadian ecosystem truly, deeply, sincerely believe that powerful AI should be a global public good. As we would say in French, point final. This is way too big, way too powerful, way too transformative to be in the hands of a few individuals, and in particular if the system they're in is one that incentivizes kind of financial profit over maybe some of these broader, bigger social considerations. And so, yes, the short answer to your question is yes. And, we haven't said our last word. We are working on a few things here at Mila. And I don't think we're the only ones. I talk about us because I know us, but I think there are more and more people, including a chunk of AI researchers, who are like, I don't know that I'm in it for what is at the finish line, the most powerful private company in the world, or should we be building this with more of a communal and collective mindset?
One of the things that alarms those of us on the outside are the number of top insiders who have left these companies along the way, right? And they go out and they warn us about what's happening. They leave for a reason. So, which brings me back to still a hopelessly simplistic question, but what does worry you the most?
I think there are many clues to what might happen next that we're not paying attention to, because there's so much going on, because AI is a bit intimidating or exciting, so we get distracted one way or another, because it's moving so fast, so we don't even have the time to digest the news from last week, and then something else happens.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm worried we're not having the conversations we need to have at all levels, within a team, an organization, a community, a country. And so that's what I'm worried about. And to say it twice instead of only one time, I do think that the stated end goal of many, if not all of these companies, which is to create autonomous agentic AIs, really is something that humankind as a collective has not even started to think about how we would integrate into our systems. This is completely different. It should not be compared to any other technology. This is technology that masters language, that has read every single thing humankind has published over thousands of years, every financial report, every poem, every play. It knows more about us than we probably know about us. And now we're going to give it the keys not only to understanding us and interacting with us, but also taking action by giving it access to different systems for a bunch of good reasons, productivity, for example. I think that's something we're not even close to being ready for, and that could happen within a year. At least that's what they're saying. Their goal is AI agents next year, and in fact, there are AI agents already within a number of organizations.
As you say that with such clarity, I can't help but think, is it too late to make them illegal? Should governments not say, no, we're not doing that? Yes, there's great potential. Yes, we see the benefits, but it just is a step too far for where we are.
Maybe at a minimum right now, we need the beginning of something that looks like legislation or a more robust cadre to be looking at the different levels of risks. Some of these AIs really, even if something goes wrong, it's not a big deal. Some of them, if something goes wrong, it's catastrophic. So we need to give ourselves structure, language, tools, laws. Absolutely. How is it that none of this is regulated? I don't know how we ended up here, but this is the moment we're at. And to our earlier conversation, in an international context right now, that makes it a bit difficult to make some of these more courageous, bold moves nationally, because ideally you'd sync them up with others. I salute the effort in the European Union. We're incredibly supportive of it. We're giving as much time and expertise as we can for this legislation to continue to move in the right direction. And I think for Canada, that would be kind of the move, would be to say, okay, we're going to have our own piece of legislation and policy, and it will be synchronized and interoperable with the EU. That would make absolute sense for us right now.
Is any of that worthwhile without the US Congress and maybe even China, if that's even possible?
I think so. I think we have to start somewhere, and it's easy for the American-based companies to say, you know what, EU, if you regulate, we're just going to pull out of your market. And then we'll see if that's what they end up doing. And maybe that wouldn't be the worst thing on earth. I don't know. Like, who knows? But whether, or said otherwise, what other choice do we have right now, right? At a minimum, we have to start somewhere. We have to do this. Maybe there are a few compromises. Maybe we don't get to do everything that some people think, would be the right answer. But we can't be hesitant, and we can't slow down too much just because we're like, oh my God, this is so big. We have to get going on this piece. More on AI safety, more on AI legislation and regulation, and more on international collaboration, cooperation. The UN is leading some very valuable work in this sphere, learning from maybe some of the mistakes of the past where it gets too heavy and burdensome, but saying, guys, we need a forum where we talk about AI at a global scale. And so this needs to continue to be initiatives that we invest in.
I want to finish with our kids, which is, of course, about the future and what I hope is grounds for optimism. Do you feel, I mean, you understand this technology so well and where it might lead us. When you think about that and the world that awaits them, is it a good picture?
It's a very different picture, and one that we're starting to see some of the colors of, but not the full contours, right? And again, I think a lot will depend on the choices that we make, we being the business leaders, the government officials, the people in roles of influence, the journalists who are asking questions or not, who are doing the articles and podcasts or not. I think a lot will depend on that. I do think that this technology will open the door on some brilliant opportunities and kind of a new world that will be very rich, if only in scientific discovery and the impact on healthcare and how we interact. But I do think we will need to revisit fundamentally what it means to be a human that contributes to something that is of value for yourself, for your immediate family or community, and then for society more broadly. So there's a profound rethink that needs to happen, some of which I'm very excited about. We don't teach our kids so much about critical thinking or philosophy. What we teach them about history is all messed up. We don't teach them how to navigate conflict or build productive team, or we don't invest in that, a lot. Mindfulness, meditation, presence, all of these things. These are all kind of core elements of what it means to be human, but we don't teach them in the academic cadre because we're like, no, they need to learn things. Well, maybe in this new world, it becomes about more of these forms of human, emotional, interrelatable intelligences and less about what up to now we've called intelligence.
We need to leave it there, Valérie. It's so good to talk to you. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
We've been speaking with Valérie Pisano of Mila. That's WONK for this week. I'm Amanda Lang.